All right, good morning. Everyone have a good weekend? Survived the heat? No, oh no. It was so hot, it was awful, but it was nice to have football back. I was super excited to have football back. In one of my fantasy leagues, I'm winning like 155 to 40. And then in the other league, it's switched. So I'm slaughtering one person and being slaughtered by someone else. So 50-50. I have to tell you, I thought of all of you. So I coach a soccer team of like 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old girls, right? And we were talking about gender last time. And this little girl on my team, she's so sweet, like such a go-getter, such a good little player. And she's 10. She's turning 11 on Wednesday. Like I just met this kid. But she comes up to me and we were going over positions. And she's like, I'd really like to play goalie. I was like, awesome, great, goalie, right? I'm like, Hazel, you're my goalie, right? Like, and she's like, are you serious? I can play goalie? I was like, well, yeah, why, like, let's try it out. Like, I've never seen her play goalie, but like, she was really good at it when we practiced it. And she's like, can I really play it? And I'm like, of course you can. And she starts crying, right? The fun of working with little kids, right? She starts crying. I'm like, oh God, what happened? Right? And she's like, my coach last season told me I couldn't do it because I'm a girl. And I was like, wait, but it was an all girls team, right? Like, you have to have a goalie. She's like, no, it was boys and girls, and he told me the boys got to play goalie, and that the girls were too delicate, so I had to play out on the field. And I was like, well, you're my starting goalie next to me, and like, who was your coach? Like, tell me his name. And like, I was just thinking about all of you on the conversation we were having, and like, as wonderful as things are starting to get like more progressive, then there's little Hazel who like was in tears because her coach in the spring, right? So just a couple of months ago, told her she couldn't play goalie because she's a girl, right? And oh, don't you think for one second I'm not on a mission to find out who that coach was so I can report them. Because this kid was in tears, like a 10-year-old, almost 11-year-old, thinking that she can't do it because she's a girl. And you know what? She's an awesome goalie. Like, oh my gosh, I was shocked. I was like, well, yeah, you're my goalie. Like, no doubt. What was that? Yeah, he was totally missing out. She's such a fierce little player. Her and my daughter always run into each other and they both fall over on the ground and start crying. Again, the perks of working with 10 and 11-year-olds. There's a lot of tears on the video. But it just made me think of what we were chatting about last time with Denver. With you. As good as things are getting, there's still stuff like that. Right? I thought it was a little sad. And I'm glad I can have her be my goalie to hopefully try and fix it. So anyway, and I'm going to see lots of gendered stuff tomorrow because I'm going to Disneyland tomorrow. Very excited about that. So I will be, it's for research to study gender roles, which I study best when eating churros. So I'll think of it. What's that? Oh, yes, I can do that. I'm thoughtful like that. I'll eat one. I'd say I'd eat one for each of you, but that would be a fortune. They're like $8 a piece, right? I have to buy 5 every time I buy them. I'm like, oh, here, take my money. But I will at least eat a bite for each of you. That feels doable. I could do that, right? Little bites. Anyway, we're gonna move forward today and talk about female reproductive anatomy, and then we go into male reproductive anatomy. And these are really important units because it's important to know the names and terminology for parts of our body, stuff that we don't tend to refer to properly a lot of the time. There's a lot of slang, and we'll look at that as well. But what I want to do to start this, and I'm actually going to turn that off for a moment here. What I want to do is I want you to get into groups of about 4 people per group. We're going to do a little like free activity. You don't need your notes. You don't need your book. In fact, if they're open, close them. But get into a group of about 4 people. Let's say like 4 or 5 people, whatever's convenient. And then I'll tell you what's next.
Really? I don't really like like leaves.
That's how I used to be. Yeah. So
All right, does everyone have a group?
now I do.
I'm delicately trying to.
Yeah, it's white. Yeah, no, that's lighter than me.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. Does everyone have a group of like four-ish? So what I want you to do in a moment here is I'm gonna have you come up and you're gonna grab three things from me. Okay, so one, you're gonna grab a big piece of paper. Two, a little card that has a bunch of structures on it. And then three, I'll have a bunch of like pens and markers and stuff. So as a group, what I want you to do is I want you to draw and label the structures that are on here. Please don't look them up. You're gonna do, I thought that was a yawn. I thought you were horrified. Oh no. I was a yawn. Sorry, not to call you out. I want you to draw and label all these structures. If you don't know what they are, make your best guess or feel free to be creative. I've had some really fun creative portrayals of things that people didn't know what they were. You can draw one picture or two. It's up to you. A lot of people do two. Some are internal, some are external. But I'm going to give you like 10 minutes to work on this together as a group. So pick your most artistically inclined member to maybe put it on the paper. I also want you to put your first and last names on the back since you're going to be turning this in for credit. And I'm going to put them up when you're done, just for fun. So when you're ready, go ahead and send one person up.
I am.
Oh, it's so technical.
I'm very hard.
Okay. Oh, I'm such a perfectionist. Now I'm gonna rip it.
Right, already. I think ours are. How do you feel about like?
Really? I don't, I didn't believe like.
I grew up with it on. I heard it all. No, I love it. I love it. I love it. It's making it really fun.
Just one picture.
And I like, yeah, no, look at it.
If your marker is dead for any reason, just toss it, come grab another one. Join your group, yes. And then.
Yeah, I think two.
Again, don't look it up, just do your best.
They're all women.
Oh,
starting with women's and then going to that. Yeah. That's why when you said that, I was like.
I kind of only know how to draw race. Because it's on every diagram, it's the whole. Yeah.
And so I kind of,
Well, okay, I know what that, I just don't know what that entails.
no, everything is shaped.
It's like a ramp.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what that.
Always did. Wait, no, we're not sexualizing, right?
No, there it is. Am I drawing? Okay. I don't know. Okay, so these are our locations. Yeah. Oh. We want to do the top line. I mean, these are all trying to kind of I'm not entirely sure. There we go. Wait, let's see.
Okay, that's.
No, it's not.
I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah. The outer.
That's what I was.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. I like to avoid.
My friend. There's that. No, so. Is that big?
That's not what I was. I'm just talking about this thing.
Not that big.
Yeah, I don't know why. Okay, so what about I should go. Wait, what? Or are you gonna insult me? No. That's what I was like. Yeah. Like it's here, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna say why are there two? It's okay.
You might jump for your next five. Wait, who's him? Wow.
Yes. I have no idea. Right there. I don't know where it would go.
I think it'd be easier to cross the giant. Like how, like,
You could draw different.
No, this one is. Where you're one big. It's like. Oh, visual markers.
Get on it.
No, like, I was wrong. I was Nice quiz. Okay. It sounds like zero. Then starting. Okay, wait, it's just.
So I'm gonna give you like 5 more minutes to get off the try to finish the last name on the back or on the paper, whichever one you want to turn in.
There's one for that one. So I just went home today. No, it's not. No, it's not. No,
I know it's not, but I was.
Okay, no.
I think I'm trying. I could tell it.
So yeah, because
And then we have it here.
That's also these over here.
Items are high, they're really right.
Oh, that's
Right before.
yeah, and then.
All right, let's put it there.
Yeah.
No, no, no.
Yeah, I think that's a color.
Yeah.
Colors, green, brown.
It's like, I don't have friends.
Oh my God.
Put it in the line.
We got it right. I took me out of it. Yeah, it was. She like tried to go and then she kept like going back like, oh, her name, and then she did try to like the exit. Which was really nice.
No, I'm just gonna add.
Yeah. I think I thought that, wait. Maybe that big is not like.
They're never there. They're present, they're there.
Should we just draw them?
It's not labeled.
Right, so just a couple more
Yeah,
minutes.
check
Try
out
to
the-
start wrapping it.
The arrow going. Oh, our names?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There you go. Did we get Like, you know, the constellations? Yeah.
Done?
I'm not.
Oh my God.
All right, after you finish up, if you want to bring them up to me and bring your markers and all that stuff, again, make sure your first and last name are on there.
Yeah.
Start wrapping it up.
Ignore the random.
Sorry, I just.
Side profile.
Oh,
Done?
Pizza.
You have a break? I was gonna do that.
Yeah.
Careful.
The other one, sorry. Like the, like, like, people.
All right. Thank you.
I'm still happy.
Oh, thank you.
No.
I love the splash of color.
I thought I wanted to be different.
Oh.
I thought.
Have someone, right?
Oh, my side profile.
Just like shouting.
I think it's body and shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, like, he's a little bit.
Like shouting. Yeah.
Like,
Or we do it.
no, more of like
And I went.
but in a good.
Like after they were died, like.
I mean, not you.
Very good. I was like, give me a second while I take these up here.
I don't know if that's what.
There we go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't look like that. That's like almost like.
I don't want them to not be seen. I just think it's
Oh.
Yeah.
I once left these up and got in so much trouble. I kind of want to wear them.
Okay, but at least it's not like an. Okay, so it's a bite. We didn't. Were you here?
I have the ones, right? Good. All right. Your beautiful images. I was gonna put it in. I want to make sure you can see the whole thing. There we go. All right. Beautiful job, right? They look so nice. Which, what gave you trouble? Did anyone have a part you were like, I don't know what that is? Anybody? You read everything else? Let's see.
Don't be vulnerable.
Ooh, okay. So the Mons Veneris is one that sometimes people don't know what it is. It's that fatty, like covering of the pubic bone. I once had somebody do the USS Mons Veneris. You said it sounded like a spell. I had somebody once say it was a vampire, like Captain Mons Veneris or something like that. I had some creative ones over time. Veneris Targaryen, I once had. Like I wrote it down because it was so funny. I'm like, I have to remember that. But these for the most part are really like not bad for doing it from your mind here. We're gonna talk about all the structures, but I thought it'd be kind of a fun way to have you start thinking about it. There are internal and external structures. So a lot of you did 2 pictures, which I think is great. And my favorite part by a mile were the hand gestures. There's a lot of hand gesturing going on, which I thought was entertaining. So anyway, I'm just gonna break the ice with this. People often get uncomfortable talking about anatomy. It is important to know the names and locations of these things, and we'll do the same for male anatomy next week as well. So, so let's jump in, I suppose, right? Talk about it. Let's talk about external genitalia first. Oh, and if you want to go back to your seats, I'm sorry, if you were in a different spot, you're welcome to do that. So external. Internal and external anatomy, right? So we're going to start with external. And when we talk about external genitalia for women, kind of collectively, we refer to all of it as the vulva. Okay, so not the vagina. The vagina is an internal structure, so we'll get there. But the vulva, right? It can everything that you would see on these wonderful images that are very spread open here, so you can see everything. But the vulva is all of the external genitalia. So vulva. For female anatomy. Okay, so all external genitalia, the mons veneris, the vestibule, the lips, or the labia, all things that we'll talk about that are external. So very different appearance, obviously from person to person, right? They interviewed quite a few gynecologists who would say that no 2 vulvas look alike. I have some images for you. I'm hoping that you can handle that. I had this up in my other class for a moment. I was like, oops, I should probably take that down. And this is a very dangerous thing to Google search, I might add. But here we go. So again, very different appearances from person to person, whether it is hair or no hair, the different size of the lips, right? Everyone having a little bit of variability, right? So again, just to put that up for perspective, and then we'll go back. But when we look at some of these other structures, so the mons veneris was one that a couple of people didn't know where to put it. Mons veneris or mons pubis. I've heard it both ways. Let's put this up here. Mons veneris. The mons veneris is like that fatty covering of the pubic bone, right? And it can be covered in hair or not, depending on a person's preference and their stage of life, right? It's Latin for mound of Venus, right? And has the intention or kind of the purpose of cushioning and protecting the pubic bone. Cushioning or protecting the pubic bone. Our bodies are designed for reproduction. Right, so the female and male like reproductive systems are designed to reproduce, right? So everything kind of has the intention of creating a child, right? And obviously that's not always how it's used, but that a lot of the structures have that intention. So during like traditional male-female intercourse, having a fatty like mound of tissue here provides a protection and cushioning to avoid like bruising and so on during intercourse. And hair again tends to appear during puberty as those hormonal influences kick into gear. The labia. So we have the labia majora and the labia minora. And these collectively tend to be referred to as like the lips of the vulva, right? Vagina would be the wrong term because vagina is an internal structure. So of the vulva, the labia majora has a kind of the same function as the mons veneris, right? It's those large outer lips on the outside of the vulva, sometimes covered in hair, sometimes not. Again, cushioning and protection. Right, kind of insulating everything, if you will, kind of containing all of the structures, cushioning and protection being their function. But the labia minora actually play quite a few roles in sexual functioning and response. So the smaller inner lips, which are much tinier and more closer to being on the inside, have quite a few like sweat and oil glands, blood vessels, and nerve endings. They play a big role in arousal. So when a woman becomes aroused, it is these different like oil glands and blood vessels that become engorged with blood and can cause lubrication to occur, right? So when a woman is like wet or lubricated, that's coming from the labia minora, right? And these different glands and blood vessels that are in it, and nerve endings, which are sensitive to touch, right? So it can play a role in arousal and stimulation as well. Other things that we talk about in terms of external genitalia, the clitoris, the monument or statue in Greece that a few people have been to, right? In those videos, nobody knew what this was if you go back like 50 years. It really only has one function. Anyone know what that is? You're right. You said it quietly, but you're right. Pleasure or feeling good, right? That's the only function of the clitoris or the clitoral hood, right? It is a very dense area of nerve endings. So it tends to play a big role in arousal and pleasure and orgasm for a lot of women. Some women don't prefer this area to be stimulated, others like exclusively, right? It's kind of all over the board that way, but it plays a big role in pleasure because it is a very dense bundle of nerve endings. Very similar, and we'll talk about this when we get to male anatomy. Female and male anatomy is the exact same in the womb or in the uterus for a period of weeks. And so at the area that becomes the clitoris or the clitoral hood becomes the head of the penis for men, which is also the most sensitive part of their anatomy. So it's interesting how these structures kind of have a very similar like male equivalent, and they're the same for about like 10 to 12 weeks or so when a baby is developing. The urethra is a small opening through which urine passes. Right, so you can see the urethral opening, right? So two different openings, right? Sometimes something that people aren't always aware of. There's a urethral opening through which urine exits, and then there's a vaginal opening, which we sometimes call the introitus. And that is where like intercourse or like stimulation would take place or a baby would come out of if you're giving birth. So different openings for different functions and purposes. The hymen is another structure. There's kind of a common slang term for this. Anyone know what it is? Cherry. Well, you said you have them, right? You can say them louder. It's all right. Right. So the hymen is a small flap of skin that tends to cover the vaginal opening. And it has a lot of like historical significance to it, right? In the past, when they were checking to see if a woman was still virtuous or still a virgin, what they would do is they would check to see if their hymen was intact. If their hymen was intact, it was thought that they hadn't had sex. They were still a virgin and virtuous. If it was not intact, scandal, right? Like it was a huge like deal if you go back in time historically. Now this can rupture for a lot of reasons other than sex. It can rupture and be gone when a woman inserts something like a tampon. That could be one thing. It can kind of go on its own at times if there's any kind of trauma or anything inserted into the vaginal canal, other than intercourse, it could also rupture. So it's not a perfect system, but it had a lot of historical significance, looking to see if it was still intact. So we could say it just covers the vaginal opening. If you remember in the documentary that we watched about Kinsey, he said that him and his wife had trouble with intercourse because she had a restricted hymen. Sometimes this can be something that requires surgery. In very rare cases like her case, it didn't rupture on its own and it kind of blocked the vaginal canal. And she had to have surgery to have it removed. Very, very rare. Typically, this is something that just kind of breaks on its own, but it might break the first time that somebody has intercourse. So it's that whole idea if somebody has a little bit of bleeding or spotting the first time they have sex, it could be because the hymen has ruptured, right? Or it could rupture quite a bit earlier than that as well. Last one, the perineum. Sorry, a little low here. The perineum is that smooth stretch of skin. Both men and women have a perineum between the end of the vaginal opening and the anus, right? So it's a very smooth stretch of skin. It can be very sensitive. So I say sensitive skin. Not to get too far into it, but if a woman rips or tears during childbirth, which you sometimes hear about, it's less common now than it used to be. But if a woman tears because the baby's head is too big, for example, it's this stretch of skin that can sometimes rip and require like being sewn back up. It's called an episiotomy. It doesn't happen very often, but it can definitely happen, especially if you have like a large baby or a large head that's coming out. So these are like the structures that we tend to talk about with external anatomy. Sometimes vestibule is like the area, this is kind of referring to the whole opening, like vestibule of a tent, for example, is like the entryway, similar concept here with the vulva. But this is all of the external anatomy. And most of you got this pretty well on your pages. I'll look at them closer later, but for the most part, it looks like they're pretty good. Yeah.
Is it possible for the hymen to cover so much of the vagina that it like stops menstrual flow?
That would be pretty, I won't say it's impossible, but it's extremely unlikely. So typically, like, it would just be blocking anything trying to like enter into the vaginal canal, but there'd be enough space for it would be able to get out. I won't say it's impossible. There are people who have like a flap of skin, like the hymen covering, that might require a procedure to fix it. It happens. It's not super common, but it happens. Any other questions, comments, thoughts, anything for the moment? Okay, I'm like, I'm not sure what that was. So what I want you to do, the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the internal structures of female anatomy, including the vagina. And we're going to do this with male and female anatomy. I think it's a really good way just to kind of get it out of our system too. So back in your groups, I want one of you to write down what you come up with so that you can share it if you're not turning it in. I want you to come up with all the slang terms you can think of for vagina, or like lower female anatomy, not breasts, we'll get there later, but all of the slang terms. You're welcome to look it up if you want, write it down because I hope you'll share, but all the slang terms your group can come up with for vagina. Let's do it. Ready, go. And you're not turning it in.
Yeah, it's right that though. I've heard some that's not just like my no swear. I'm definitely
All right.
No, no.
Okay, so I can explain.
No, no. No explanation.
Oh. Yeah, also. Yeah. Like a rhino, but for No, it's not my favorite. And I was really I get sad. But that's cute for me. Okay. Come on, you're good. I know.
Yes. You said you would like a flower.
Oh, we got one day. It's John, no.
Yeah, you're going. Teddy and Mitch. Harry Potter.
I wait till I saw that. Yeah, yeah. It's not here.
Couple more minutes.
But
There's gotta be more. Sorry, I stopped. I think you're also like, what's your point?
yeah, I've been actively keeping on this. You know, you still hasn't. I mean, I agree your president.
Oh. No, okay, I'm gonna explain it.
I like it. I like our wild random, you know, homosexual and heterosexual is bullshit. Yeah. He's doing like that.
Really?
Oh my gosh, so, you know, like I thought it was here, but never.
All right, motion for you down for person. We're gonna do this for We're gonna do this for several other, you can start thinking about it, we're gonna do this for the rest, it's probably next class, so you're just gonna know that. We'll do it for male anatomy, of course, next week, lots of slang for that, so you can figure out that as well. And then we do one more later this semester, when we do anatomy. So, does anyone want to read their list? Yeah, I'm gonna do, anyone to read it? We'll start over here. I see you can already. Okay, you wanna go first? Okay, so let's keep it down so you can hear. And then,
Am I reading all of them?
yeah, go for it.
Okay. So we obviously have vagina. We have, this is actually more uncomfortable than I thought. Okay. Pussy, hoo-ha, JJ, my favorite. Cookie, punani, no square, coochie, kitty cat.
Okay, that wasn't too bad, right? You survived, you survived. Did I see it?
I know.
That's okay, just read it out, you can read the whole thing, even if there's overlap.
River Wonders.
Okay.
Flower.
Oh.
We also said the JJ, or just like that.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, but there's one I still like.
But now you have, what is it? I mean, right, okay, all right, anything else to add? I don't know, you're like crossing it out, no. All right, does anyone else want to read the list? Don't worry if there's overlap. Yeah, we'll go here and then. We'll go here.
All right.
Go for it. Don't worry about the overlap, just. go for it. Oh, I love it, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Pussy, kitty, cherry, coochie, cookie, chi-chi, cooch, coin purse, the JJ, that, private parts, crotch, lady parts, kids, punani, bean, penis flytrap. The C word, flower, hoo-ha, fanny, and minge.
Oh, impressive, nice job, nice job. Okay, lots of things. Can I tell you a funny story?
Yes.
So when I was in college, myself, my partner, and then two other like lesbians, like we all went out to this restaurant. And my friend was so sheltered, like grew up really sheltered, super religious family, had a hard time with their sexuality. But we sat down at this like Japanese restaurant and she ordered a vajayjay roll. She said it wrong. That's not what it was called on the menu. And the waitress like died. Like she couldn't come back to the table. She was so like mortified for my friend. And my friend was like, what did I do? I'm like, you just ordered like a group of 4 lesbians together. And you just ordered a potato roll. She was like, oh my, she'd be mortified. We never went back there. It was hilarious. We made fun of her and we bought her a t-shirt that said it. Oh, we never let it go. Anyway, random thing, I should probably keep that to myself, but I thought I'd share it with you, right? Yeah.
Do you know what it actually said?
No, I don't, I wish I knew, right? I'm never going back there to find out. It's been 20 years, I still wouldn't go back to looking at it. It's pretty embarrassing. Do you want to read yours anyway, even if there's a lot of overlap?
Oh, yeah, there's.
That's okay, go for it.
So some of these are weird.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a beaver, a muff, a box, a plunge, a honey pot, a penis flytrap, obviously, a clam, a coin purse, a mimi, which is very European. Coochie, pussy, cunts, a fanny, bits, hole. How did you do it? And then like a kitty. Oh, and a foof. Oh, foof. I love foof.
Okay, I love the excitement, right? So much slang, right? There are a million terms of slang. My kids, when they were little, called it pirates.
Interesting.
I have 3 girls, they're like, my pirates hurt. They were trying to say privates, but they thought it was pirates. Like, so for years, my kids were like, my pirates hurt, and my partner and I would be like, arr. They meant pirates, but there's so much slang, right? And a big reason that there's so much slang, people have a lot of discomfort with their bodies, right? And it's so much easier to throw out slang that's often comical and over the top than it is to refer things by their proper names, which is obviously what we're focusing on today. So you can hold on to that list. We'll revisit more slang shortly. But let's look at the internal structures now. So internal structures of female anatomy. And again, a lot of you did a beautiful job. I went over there and looked. Great job labeling these and drawing these. So some structures that we have here. So vagina, which we just did slang for. is an internal structure. Remember, vulva refers to everything external. Vagina is that vaginal canal or vaginal opening, internal structure. It's a very muscular canal. Plays a big role in childbirth. And it has a lot of nerve endings and blood vessels. Squeaky, sorry. So playing a lot of roles and a lot of different functions here, right? So this area is where a baby would come out of, right? If a woman gives birth vaginally, right? It comes out the vaginal canal. Also has a lot of like mucous membranes, muscles, fibrous tissue, blood vessels and nerve endings, right? It plays a big role in arousal. A lot of roles in intercourse, right? This is where a penis would be inserted during intercourse, right? So a lot of different functions, right? And again, an internal structure. As a side note, and we'll talk about this more in male anatomy, the vaginal canal is 4 inches. Okay, for all of our expectations about male penis size, the vaginal canal in its resting state 4 inches. Okay, it can obviously expand to accommodate much more than that, but it is about 4 inches in its resting state. It expands as well during childbirth to make room for that baby. The cervix. Okay, so the cervix is kind of the small little area at the end of the uterus. Plays a huge role in pregnancy. So the cervix, when a woman is pregnant, closes off. So it's this area kind of at the back of the vaginal canal right here. It plugs up and closes off when a woman is pregnant to maintain that uterus environment. And when a woman goes into labor, this is what starts to open and expand, right? In order to allow like labor to continue and progress. So with the cervix, the uterus, which we sometimes call the womb. Right, this is where a baby grows during pregnancy. So let's say fetal development. It also plays a big role in orgasm. The muscles in the uterus are what expand and contract when a woman has an orgasm. This is where the baby or fetus will grow during that 9-month pregnancy. We'll talk more about that when we get to that chapter. The fallopian tubes. So the fallopian tubes are the long tubes coming out of the ovaries that feed into the uterus. And a couple of you on your picture kind of had them and the uterus blended, or it might just be the way that you drew it. But they play a big role in fertilization. So these tubes carry eggs from the ovary down to the uterus. And this is where fertilization takes place. Fertilization is when egg and sperm meet. Okay, so when an egg and sperm meet, it takes place in the fallopian tubes, and then that egg, that's fertilized egg, has to travel down and implant into the uterine wall for pregnancy to occur. So if you've ever heard of like an ectopic pregnancy or a tubal pregnancy, sometimes that fertilized egg can get stuck in the fallopian tube and start to grow and develop. Really dangerous and requires surgery. If it progresses too much, it can be very dangerous. There's not enough room for that to happen there. And so that's pretty rare, but it can happen. That's called an ectopic pregnancy, but it carries down and usually implants into that uterine wall. And that's where fertilization would take place. It also was in charge of carrying those eggs from the ovaries to allow that to happen. The ovaries. The ovaries, which you can see there's 2, right? 2 fallopian tubes, 2 ovaries, in charge of producing eggs. Eggs or ova, which you can call ova or ovum as well. They also play a big role in sex hormones. Right, releasing a lot of estrogen, progesterone, a lot of different hormones that we kind of mentioned, and we'll mention again coming up here. But a lot of different structures here, again, still playing a role, right? So we have all the external anatomy and all the internal anatomy, and these are the internal structures. Any questions, thoughts, comments, questions, anything about the internal structures? Yeah.
Okay, so you said the average
Vaginal canal.
Yes.
I got you.
Inches.
Yes.
Is there evidence that like when you're having sex that it expands, because
Mhm.
it expands during childbirth? Is there like an average number it expands, or just it's definitely person to person, obviously, but
Yeah.
is there an average for that?
So what happens, because it's a muscular canal, it stretches, right? It stretches and expands. And some women have issues of after childbirth, it's stretched and they have to do exercises like Kegel exercises to help bring it back to where it was before. So it can expand quite a bit to accommodate a baby. So, you know, if you figure like on average, babies are about like 7 pounds on average, like a full baby would come through the vaginal canal. So I mean, I won't say it has a limit necessarily, but like average male penis size is like 5.5, 6 inches, like 5.6 is the technical average. And so that's not that far beyond the vaginal canal's like resting like state. So it can definitely accommodate quite a bit more. Right. I don't know if there's ever been measured of how much, but if you think about the size of a newborn baby, it can accommodate a fair deal. There's a lot of stretching that goes on during like labor, where when a woman is in labor, that cervix opens up and it's helping to stretch and expand the canal
Doesn't it
as
take
well.
a while?
Yes,
There-
it can, right? And so when we're talking about like intercourse, like much more than like 6 to 7 inches could sometimes be quite painful for people. Because it is, you know, pushing the limits of like that natural state of around 4 inches. Yeah, it's a good question. Other questions, other thoughts for now? Anything else? Okay. Let's talk about menstruation then, right? Very exciting. I'm terrified. I'm waiting for my twins to start their periods. I'm scared, right? I only have one right now, right? But when they do, it's my house is gonna be intense, right? So I want you in your groups one more time today, last time for today, with your groups. Slang terms for menstruation. There aren't as many, so I won't give you quite as long, but slang terms and then any like messages or stereotypes that you can think of related to the menstrual cycle as well. So messages, stereotypes, and slang. Write it down so that you can share it. I'll give you a few minutes and then we'll talk about it together.
I mean. I think I felt like yours were worse. What she has right now. Here. Yeah. That's a phrase, but. Oh, yeah. Anymore? Oh, like. I've heard more. You know, I've seen it take coffee. Yeah. Now I know I've seen it here.
Yeah. You're about.
Going through.
Go like that.
Again, slang.
Okay, so I guess. And then. Grades are bad. Because a lot of men think they're not that bad. I love seeing that.
Oh, I love watching.
You're not like, oh my God.
I love. I feel like it was really like I'm sure like beautiful texture. That's like a really long way to say. He puts it on and she puts it on. Oh my God.
It's so good because they really for all I call it.
The worst.
I don't know, it's that one time that. To me, like my dad. Like I remember one time I go to the day, like for what, I just needed to. And I was trying to make it. Yeah, and he's like, no, I didn't know why. So I said. And then he was like, oh, you.
Didn't want to ask.
I'll give you like one more minute, then we can talk about it.
I don't have to like put that, but like, it's like the weirdness behind them. I guess it's like, weird. Maybe just like, so I'm just like. No. That's so cool. My dad was there. Oh, that's a good man. That's a good man. You know, that's a good man. So, yes.
I'm telling you.
All right, anyone wanna share, what slang terms did you come up with for menstrual cycle? Anybody on menstruation? Slang terms that you wanna share? Not as many, but there's still some. What do we got? No one wants to read the list? This one's scary, I'm like, wait, you did female anatomy so well, yeah.
Okay, we got period, time of the month, Shark Week, on the rag, bleeding, code red, ant flow, monthly visitor, the Red Sea, the week, and moon cycle.
Excellent, that's a great list. Does anyone have anything that wasn't on there?
No.
Any other ones to add?
I always cover it all.
You covered it all, right? Those are good ones, right? Again, not as much like slang, but a lot of like slang terms for this time of the month. What about some of the like messages or stereotypes, or like, did anyone have any messages, thoughts, stereotypes that came up? Yeah,
You're unclean.
okay, all right. It's a really common one. What else? Anything else you can think of? Yeah,
That like cramps aren't that bad.
okay, they're not that bad, right? Yeah, and like they can be quite painful for some people, right? And some people don't experience any cramps, right? Kind of all over the board. What else? Any other like stereotypes or messages, thoughts, anything? Yeah.
I think personally, my personal experience, there's like a weirdness with like men and like knowing about periods, like, or like, I don't know, like knowing that their girlfriend or their daughter's on their period, like it's really weird.
Okay.
I feel like it's been made out to be weird. So.
Weird. Right, and there's a lot of discomfort with it too, like not wanting to talk about it or address it. Yeah.
And like the stigma around like buying like pads and tampons.
Yeah.
And stuff like you're supposed to like hide it in your purse.
Right, like,
You shouldn't show.
right, that it's embarrassing to buy them, to have them, to carry them, right? A lot of embarrassment around it too, yeah.
Have like the second grade, like tea party or whatever, when all the boys would go outside, all the kids started saying, discussions and everything. It was like, can't talk about this with anyone, it's super private,
Sure.
you make your dad and your brother uncomfortable, you don't get shame, all that shit.
Yeah, right, like a lot of messages of shame and embarrassment and like, don't talk about it, especially with anyone who's not female, right? Thank you, yeah.
On that note, like sometimes, like I've only done this like 2 times because I hate his reaction to it, but sometimes I would, if my dad was like going to the store, I'd be like, oh, can you pick up pads or tampons? He would literally go, ugh, like to my face.
Okay,
Yeah.
right, you're like, well, you could deal with the consequence of not getting it, but okay. All right, and just the discomfort of having to talk about it by them potentially, right? Anybody else? I thought that was a hand, yeah?
Kind of when like whenever like women are angry and men are like, oh, are you on your period?
Yeah, right. That stereotype of like, oh, you're out of control or emotional or angry. You must be like on your period or PMSing or something like that. Anything else? Anything else come up? Talk about? Yeah.
Being peckish.
Okay, okay. As a like a common thing.
You know, like, oh, like chocolate is like a big thing. Yeah.
Okay, and for some, it can be, right? Or it could be all the time if you're other people, right? My dad growing up, I remember he sat my brother and I down, which is the 2 of us at the time, my 2 brothers. I have another brother who's much older, or sorry, much younger. But he sat the two of us down, and he's like, there's gonna be like a week out of the month where your mom is just not right. And I'm like, and we were little, we were like, what do you mean? Like, it was like, she's don't talk to her, she's gonna be really off, like, and just know that. And my brother and I remember us looking at each other like, she really wants to? Like, I was like 7 and he was 4, you know, and it was like, what are you trying to say? And then he's like, well, she's just gonna be emotional. Like, okay, well, that's much better than monster. Like, I was thinking like she worked into something, right? And it's just like so many stereotypes and kind of negative and shameful messages about something that is really like a natural biological process that you really don't have a lot of control over. I mean, you can manipulate it with certain medications, but this is something that most women start around the age of like 11 and a half is the average beginning age for people to start their menstrual cycle, right? And a menstruation or a menstrual cycle is when people are shedding or discharging that built up uterine lining. So the lining of the uterus is called the endometrium. The lining of the uterus. Every month, a woman's body builds up this lining in preparation for a fertilized egg to come and implant itself, right? And if that doesn't happen, right, then that lining is released in the form of a menstrual cycle, menstrual flow. Right? And the term menstruation actually comes from, it's related to the lunar cycle. The lunar cycle is 29.5 days. And the average menstrual cycle, we talk about it, is 28 days. So it's related to the menstrual cycle. And if you even look at the word menstruation, mene means moon. It's the moon. And menses equals month. Right, so we're talking about this, looks like I have some weird witchcraft going on there. So now you got me on the witchcraft note. Right, so talking about the lunar cycle, that's where the term comes from. And again, it's roughly 28 days on average, though there's an incredible amount of variability from woman to woman. Menarche or menarche, I've heard it both ways, is the first menstrual cycle, and menopause is the end of menstruation. So again, tending to start around the years of like 11 to 12 or right around 11 and a half. The average used to be a little later, but with increased obesity, increased like chemicals mimicking the role of like estrogen and so on in food, we're seeing it younger and younger and younger. My oldest was 9.5. Was not expecting that, right? She's always been big, like a bigger girl, like she looks 16, even though she's 12. But she started at 9.5, which is not unheard of, but usually it's closer to like 11 and a half or so on average. And then ending menopause somewhere between 45 to 55. So we're talking about a really good chunk of most women's lives is spent having a menstrual cycle. And the full purpose of this is to allow for pregnancy to occur. The whole thing is designed around pregnancy. And so if you don't have pregnancy occur, then you have a menstrual cycle each month. I have a little video. Let me play this for you as just like an introduction, and then I'll write some more up here on the board. I have a nice accent in this, which makes it in play during the menstrual cycle. And we mentioned some of them previously when we were talking about gender, but a lot of different hormones like happening in the body, right? All of this kind of going on constantly. And we typically talk about this as a 28-day cycle. Now, some people are much shorter, some people are much longer, some people have 28 days and then 40 days and then 19 days, like it can be all over. Other people, it's 28 days every month and it's like clockwork, right? So there's an incredible amount of variability here. But the first phase, the menstrual phase, is typically right here. This is phase 1, the menstrual phase. And in the menstrual phase, this is when people are shedding that lining. They're actively bleeding, if you will. They're like releasing that lining. So we can say shedding the lining of the uterus, right? And typically for most people, this is like 4 to 6 days, right? Some people have a very heavy menstrual cycle. And it's very short, other people very light and it's longer. And again, it can change from month to month. It can change based on your weight, based on your hormonal influences, based on stress, right? A lot of factors affect hormones which can in turn affect your menstrual cycle. So in phase one, the menstrual phase, this is when you're actively like bleeding or shedding that endometrium, that lining of the uterus. The follicular phase is the second part, right? So here in this phase, we go down here. This is two. The follicular. Follicular means follicle means egg, right? So in the follicular phase, what we see is that an egg is starting to mature for release. So egg maturing for release. A lot of different hormones play a role in this, right? So what we see is we have things like FSH, which we talked about before, follicle stimulating hormone, follicular follicle, it's stimulating that egg or that follicle to develop and mature as it gets ready to be released. In the next phase, right around here, this is 3, ovulation. This is when the egg is released. So the egg is released, starts traveling down the fallopian tube. It's waiting to be fertilized. In this stage, women have a really big surge of LH, or luteinizing hormone, right? That was in the last slide, if you want to like spell it out, right? But luteinizing hormone, and this is right around day like 13 or 14 of the cycle. And so oftentimes people who are trying to get pregnant will test for that. If you ever heard someone saying, oh, we're timing our ovulation, we're waiting till we're ovulating, they're testing for LH. When women have a huge surge of LH, that means that egg is about to be released, right? And so when they urinate on a little stick like you would for a pregnancy test, it can detect this and people can use it to know, oh, I'm ovulating, we should have sex so we can try and get pregnant, or avoid sex so we don't get pregnant, right? You can go either way. This period of time right here, somewhere around like day 17, let's say like 15 to 17, we sometimes call this the fertile window. So if somebody is trying, if somebody's trying to get pregnant, they're waiting for ovulation and then they're having intercourse or introducing sperm right here after that, because there's an egg traveling down the fallopian tube ready to be fertilized. If you want to avoid getting pregnant through like natural methods, you have intercourse before ovulation. If you have intercourse anywhere in here, and there's a lot of like taboo for people having intercourse while they're actively on a menstrual cycle. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's a lot of like societal stuff around that. But somewhere between days 1 and 15, if you have intercourse in here, unprotected sex, you are very, very unlikely to get pregnant because there's no egg to fertilize. Back here, like way at the end, same thing. You're unlikely because that egg is already passed. In here, danger zone, right? Really good if you're trying to get pregnant, but if you're trying to avoid it, your risk is the highest because there's an active egg there that could be fertilized. In the last phase, the luteal phase, which is right around here. The luteal phase, they call it that because there's a body that forms called the corpus luteum. And that corpus luteum forms and it releases a lot of different hormones to produce and maintain that endometrium in case pregnancy has occurred. So at this point, that lining of the uterus is building, it's preparing and building and building. If no fertilization takes place, then boom, we're back to the menstrual cycle. And we go again and again and again for like 30 plus years, right? So this is just this ongoing hormonal cycle of like that menstrual like flow, that lining being shed, followed by the egg maturing for release. It's eventually released with that surge of LH. That luteum builds the lining up in preparation for it, but nothing happens. So then we're back here. Right? And again, over and over and over we go. So you can use this knowledge to help you get pregnant if that's your goal, or even avoid getting pregnant if that's your goal. And what we see is there's a lot, again, hormonal influences, which is why some women do experience things like PMS or worse. And we'll pick up and we'll talk about this more next time. So I'll stop here. I'll leave this up in case you wanted to take a picture, and I'll take your beautiful drawings home with me, even though I would love to leave them up and get in trouble. But have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you all on Wednesday.
Why do you say that? He's a British man, and I know exactly what you're talking. Yeah. Why did he say it? I don't know. Why did they get this? I don't know. He sounded even that's not.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Wait, it's just fun.
Why say it like that?
I don't know.
Wait, don't make it weird.
Thank you. Yeah. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your name's on the list, right? Like, will the paper that I hear about?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I was worried because it wasn't at first we wanted to get the.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Bye. Take care.